background, that was the starting point in the development of our scope. We've been working with local staff and others over the past few months to develop that scope and put some more technical content in it, which I'm going to walk through here with you over the next few minutes. Tom, we can go to the next slide, please. So what are we trying to achieve with this study? What's our desired outcome? And what we're trying to do is really take a step back and give you a comprehensive and objective evaluation of the corridor and the transit opportunities and alternatives that would potentially benefit the corridor, looking at cost, benefits, the impacts of each of those options, and then provide that information so that it can inform recommendations made recommendations and decisions made about future investments in the corridor. So it's really to take stock of where we are, provide some technical analysis and a slate of recommendations that can be considered as we move forward in this corridor. Next slide, please. So what's on the screen now is a map of our study area. As you can see, we follow obviously the Potomac River on the east, and the study area goes just west of the I-95 corridor. We also wanted to highlight in this map some of the transit and high capacity transit alternatives that are already existing within the study area and in development for the study area, including the Metro Rail, both the blue and the yellow lines that dip just inside the study area on the northern edge there south of I-495. We have the Virginia Railway Express that covers the entire study area north to south, roughly paralleling I-95. And also want to highlight the Richmond Highway Bus Rapid Transit Project, which is shown in yellow on Route 1, just south of the Huntington Metro Station. So that's kind of our geographic territory that we're working within as we conduct the study and look at. Next slide, please. To talk a little bit about the technical approach. Every transportation study starts out and talks about project needs and what conditions we're trying to address in the corridor. That's where we have been working primarily up to this date with the local staff, with the transit agency staff in the corridor. I will talk a little bit more about those project needs. But from there, and the point at which we're in the study right now, this study is going to follow two parallel tracks, which is a little different than what we typically do in a standard transit corridor study. If you look at those blocks that are on the right in the flow chart, that is what we do in a traditional transit study. We look at existing and planned land uses. We then define potential transit alternatives, work to develop those alternatives, test them against our regional models, and then come up with study recommendations. So we are following that more, I would say, traditional track of looking at some transit alternatives for the corridor. But in parallel to that, and what you see in those green boxes on the right-hand side of the slide is we're looking at the potential of some different land use scenarios that could think a little more creatively and beyond what might be documented in a local comp plan currently. Obviously, we would work very closely. We're already working very closely with the local government, so we would continue to do that as we look at some potential activity centers and some mobility nodes or station area opportunities where some additional consideration for land use may actually change the types of transit alternatives that would be viable in the corridor. So along with those land use scenarios, we would then in parallel again test and evaluate different scenarios along with different transit alternatives that would work for those land use scenarios. Those two paths will come back together with our study recommendations, which again are due by December 1st of this year. While we're working through this study process, we are also working in coordination with our local government agencies and outreach to the public. So a very open process that we're going to kick off following today's briefing. So in terms of need, and this is something that we as a study team looked at based on existing plans and existing corridor studies. I think this stretch of I-95 in particular has been studied quite a bit from a transit perspective, a multimodal perspective. So we do have a lot of technical information and background to dig into as a place to start. And we also had a good work session with our technical advisory committee, which is comprised of your local staff and transit agency staff and representatives from the military bases to really dig into, what are the corridor needs that really drive us to looking at enhanced public transportation in this study area. And what you see on the screen are the things that we heard. We heard the importance of having high quality transit that is competitive for commute trips, that is competitive and helps fill gaps where there's little to no service today. So trying to up the quality of service in the study area. We also heard about future development and that our existing services and our existing transit networks may need some enhancement, may need to be more robust to support planned land uses and economic development that is either already occurring or slated to occur within the study area. We talked about equity and the need to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind and we're making those good connections to low-income and minority populations, making sure that we're providing access not only to job opportunities, but also to education and healthcare. We talked about connections to activity centers. I don't think we can ever understate, the role that Fort Belvoir and Marine Corps Base Quantico, the impact that those facilities have on travel in this particular study area. And so how we make connections to those activity centers and other regional activity centers in the study area is going to be a really important component of this study. We also need to look at things like traffic congestion and travel times. And we know that, traffic congestion on 95 is a real challenge. The bridge there at Occoquan is the most congested or the biggest choke point in the I-95 corridor. Trying to figure out ways that we can provide some transit service that's not stuck in traffic with everybody else, obviously is a goal for us to look at so that we can provide more reliable transit alternatives. And also in looking at transit, we also have to talk about access. And you can have good transit, but if you don't have a way to get people onto your transit system, whether it's through park and ride lots or through good pedestrian access, then folks aren't going to be able to use it. And so making sure that we have good access to those services is also a need that's been identified for us to look at in this study. Next slide, please, Tom. So I'm going to switch gears right now and talk a little bit more about that land use component of the study. And what we're planning to do with this is to do a corridor land use assessment. This is something that we would do in very close coordination with the local governments to, talk to them, work with them to identify mobility hubs, identify areas where anticipated growth or anticipated density would be the type of location where you would see a potential transit station in the future. In doing that, we would build off of our multimodal system design guidelines. These are a tool that we at DRPT have developed in partnership with our colleagues at VDOT to develop a set of guidelines for us to be able to look at land use scenarios and the transportation recommendations that fit those types of development patterns. And those guidelines, we're fortunate, we just updated those last year. And so this is really going to be our first opportunity in this type of study to put those to work. So it's a good time for us to jump into this type of planning study. We plan to look at those guidelines and look at those potential mobility hubs and do that through some work sessions, particularly with the local planning staffs, potentially looking at some recommendations for land use and zoning or transit supportive policy recommendations. We have access through the multimodal system design guidelines and other tools that our consultant team has available. We have the ability to do illustrative diagrams to really reflect what that type of transit supportive land use would look like. Once we have gone through developing those different land use scenarios, we will evaluate the impact of those land use scenarios on potential transit alternatives, and likewise, everything that we look at with this land use assessment is going to be turned over to the counties, and it's up to them. That's a tool that's available for them to inform their local land use decisions as those move forward. Next slide, Tom. We also, through Cambridge Systematics, we have access to a relatively new planning tool called Urban Footprint. And this is a tool that's going to be utilized to help develop those conceptual land use scenarios in greater detail. And we have scoped in our study to look at those at up to 10 potential station locations or transit hub areas. The Urban Footprint tool uses a library of different building in place types and information to help quantify what potential scenarios from the land use side would look like in greater detail. It enables us to really articulate better what those potential land uses might look like. And the graphic on the slide on the screen is a project that the consultant team is working on right now. It's in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and where they're working on a BRT project development. So trying to make sure that we're making use of the most cutting edge tools and resources in looking at different options as part of this study. Next slide, Tom. Switching back over to the more traditional transit study element or that parallel traditional transit study path. We do have a number of issues that we're going to consider in that part of the study as well. We look at things like existing and future transit demand in the corridor. We use those studies that have been done previously, and again, there are a number of them that have been done over the past few years. We also look at other planned transportation improvements in the corridor, things like the enhancements in the CSX corridor to enhance passenger rail are considered as part of the baseline for this study because those projects are already moving forward. We also look at plans for transit supportive development in the study area. This is where the land use and the transit elements of the study really do tie back in together. We look at access to the bases, which I've mentioned already. We also look at short-term and long-term trends in transit ridership and telecommuting. That's part of our regular process. Definitely the times we are in terms of COVID-19 and as we start to enter into the recovery from the pandemic. Certainly those short-term trends are a little different than what we normally look at, but so we'll be focusing more on long-term and making some assumptions around how transit ridership and telecommuting will recover along with the recovery from the pandemic. We also need to look at things like metro rail system capacity and capacity in places like the Roslyn Tunnel and those core capacity constraints that surround potential metro rail expansion projects. We need to take those things into consideration, but also look at the potential and how those core capacity considerations are being considered and addressed in other work that's already underway. We need to look at the capital and operating cost of the potential transit investments. That's one of those pieces of information that we want to make sure that we have captured as part of the study to inform our future decision, inform future decision making as a result of the study. And then finally, it's also important that WMATA functions under an interstate compact. We will have to look at the compact implications of any potential metro rail expansions, along with funding and governance considerations. That would be additional information that we would be able to pass along as part of the technical analysis of this study. Next slide. So in terms of outreach and engagement, we're starting with this today, and this is a briefing for the elected officials. And our goal is to provide a venue for you to learn more about the study, to provide us input, to ask questions. Unfortunately, we're still in this virtual environment that makes holding briefings like this a little more awkward than they are when we are able to meet in person. But we are committed to working with you and making sure that you have the information that you need about the study, and making sure that you have an opportunity to be engaged and provide input to the study. So these briefings, we've invited our local and state elected officials that serve the study area with the support of our of DRPT and the consultant team, and also with the support of your senior staff from your local governments, from the transit providers and regional bodies, as well as senior staff from the military bases that have been engaged with us as well on the technical side. All of our meetings are advertised and they are open to the public. That is the case with today's briefing. This was publicly advertised and is being made available via live stream. It will be recorded and available on our study webpage as part of the record of the process of this study going forward. So we do anticipate having several briefings like this through the course of the study. I also want to emphasize that the study team is always available to you. So if you want a one-on-one briefing or have some more specific questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We're happy to do that at any point in time as well. In terms of public and agency outreach, I've mentioned a couple of times we have a great group of technical stakeholders who are appointed by your local governments and the transit agencies to help provide input and review throughout the study process. And that technical advisory committee has met a few times now to provide input on the needs and the background materials that have gotten us to the point where we are ready to start looking at potential alternatives and really diving into those two parallel elements of the study on that technical. In terms of public outreach, while we've been doing this background work, there hasn't been much in terms of public outreach. That's going to start to change now. But our public outreach plan does provide for multiple opportunities for education and engagement across the study area. While we're still in this COVID environment, we are looking for creative ways to engage the public. And we also, as hopefully the situation continues to improve, we look to utilizing some of those more traditional methods of getting out and kind of talking to people where they are about their needs to travel within the corridor. But throughout all of that, we are looking to leverage the relationships that we have with the local jurisdictions, with the transit agencies, and with key community organizations. Our consultant team has a lot of expertise in using tools to reach and engage environmental justice and Title VI populations. That is, we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to provide feedback and so to be part of and engaged in the study. And that process has some early metrics and the ability to document all of that feedback so that we build a good record behind what comes out of the study in terms of recommendations. Again, I can't emphasize it enough. Our consultant team is very skilled at this. They're very flexible, and we are looking at different ways that we can accommodate the ongoing pandemic, but hope that we can do some face-to-face engagement before we conclude this study later this year. Next slide. So just a little bit more on public outreach, because I think this This graphic really shows how that public input, along with the technical feedback that we get from our technical stakeholders that you see there listed on the screen. We're going to be, working in close coordination, taking the information that we receive from the public, working that back through our stakeholders. Our technical advisory committee our technical advisory committee is meeting on a monthly basis already, but we also have the ability to meet with small groups, to have some very specific, whether it's jurisdictionally based or topic-based work sessions. We have the ability to do that through the course of the project. From a public-facing perspective, we have a project website that is going to go live this week, along with a project fact sheet and some information about the technical advisory committee meetings that have been conducted to date. All of that will be shared on that public website. The public website will also provide a mechanism for individuals to submit comments at any point in time, to reach out to the project team as well. We do anticipate conducting surveys and, again, hopefully having some pop-up meetings, open houses, and being able to have some of that face-to-face engagement before we do wrap up later this year. Next slide. So in terms of schedule, we have a lot of ground to cover between now and December 1st. We did start working on the study last fall, and we did spend a lot of time with that technical advisory committee last fall, really diving into the needs, looking at the data that's available for the corridor, the findings from the previous studies, really pulling together that universe of information. And we're now right at the point where things start to get really, really interesting, because we finished that baseline needs assessment and we are now ready to move into looking at alternatives, developing those alternatives, evaluating those alternatives, both on the transit side and also looking at those different land use scenarios. That's what's going to start happening now, with input from the public that will carry us through the summer, and then to a slate of recommendations and a final report to the General Assembly by December 1st of this year. I think I have one more slide. So in terms of next steps, this is kind of our kickoff to give you a little background on the study and where we're going with it and what our schedule is. But we do anticipate having future briefings where we will be able to dive into the next phases of the study in some more detail, including looking at our different transit alternatives, looking at the evaluation of those alternatives, and also the findings of the land use assessment, and then finally the draft study recommendations before those do get finalized. We are targeting to try to finish those draft study recommendations by September, so that we have some time to work through those study recommendations, to get input, and then to finalize the final report and have that submitted by December 1st. So with that, that concludes our formal presentation on the scope and schedule. Myself, as well as the remainder of myself and the study team, are happy to take any questions or input that you may have that will help us continue to move this study forward.
Hi, Jennifer. This is Senator Dave Marsden.
Hello, Senator Marsden.
How are you? Thank you very much for the briefing. Just one suggestion, and I don't know what the exact circumstances are with the new FBI headquarters that had been potentially to be relocated to Springfield, although that hadn't been determined. My understanding is they're starting to relocate and create a sort of a headquarters in Huntsville, Alabama. But one thing that might be helpful is to engage with the FBI on this transit study, because one of the things that was in Springfield's favor was the fact of its proximity to Quantico, and including them in your study would help encourage a future decision to perhaps locate in Springfield and create a transit opportunity for between the headquarters and their Quantico training center.
Senator Marston, that's a great suggestion. We will certainly follow up on that.
Thank you.
All right, we have Senator Surabel. I see that you've got your hand raised in the chat box.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. So I don't know if Senator McPike is on here, but he and I were talking about this the other day, and on a couple of your slides, I think it's like maybe the third or fourth slide, and also on slide 7, you all had a map showing the study area. And my understanding is that we're at least examining the possibility of taking the blue line into Potomac Mills Mall. And if that's the case, it would seem to me that the study area needs to at least include Lake Ridge and go all the way up to Hoadley Road, and that having it at Minnieville is way too narrow. I mean, I think anybody below Hoadley Road would be interested in taking advantage of some of the transit that we're talking about building. And I think by leaving the study area line down at Minnieville, we're probably constraining the feasibility of all our alternatives. Have you all looked at that at all?
Tom or Tim, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, this is Tim. I think, Tom, why don't you answer, since you were your team was involved in developing study area?
Yeah, sure. This is Tom Harrington with Cambridge Systematics. Yeah, when we started to lay out the study area, the way sort of our criteria for laying it out is that the actual alignments would fall within that study area. We recognize that the area of influence in terms of travel would extend well beyond the study area. We have people coming from the south, we have people coming from the west. So that was kind of how we laid it out with the Technical Advisory Committee and kind of discussed that and kind of drew the line there. So, and when we talked with Prince William County staff, there was consensus that we didn't anticipate alignments going to the northwest of Minnieville, but in terms of representing it on the map, that's something we certainly could take a look at in further detail if there's interest.
So am I correct that the study area does not represent necessarily the scope of people who you think might use this? It only represents the scope of possible alignments of various lines?
That's correct. That we certainly anticipate all of our alignments would pick up some through travel through our study area.
Okay, so, yeah. Well, but one of the things that makes transit work, or at least high density transit like Metro work, at least within Fairfax County, is that, and I assume other places, is that many of the stations are also served by bus lines that feed, pedestrians into the station. And so wouldn't part of the feasibility study also examine sort of the need for buses that would feed people to these metro stations and not just people driving their car and parking in a parking deck?
Yes, that's correct.
So why wouldn't the study area include that broader area that people might be bused in from to the station?
Yeah, we are certainly looking at access that extends beyond the study area boundaries.
Yeah. Tom, is it fair to state that we use the COG, Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments regional model to do a lot of the technical analysis that enables us to really get the much broader picture than just the study area, and does address some of that? Is that an accurate statement as well?
Yes, the COG model region is certainly much larger and extends even further south, Prince William County.
Okay, and then, well, that gets to my next question, which you sort of touched on a little bit in the presentation, but y'all talked about population models. And I think if we use the existing COG population assumptions, it's basically going to say that the only thing that works is some buses or something. And I thought the entire idea, at least amongst the elected officials who were pressing this, the state elected officials whose idea this was that we were going to look at getting a plan back on what it takes to bring the blue line to Prince William County. And the existing population assumptions would never support that. We all know that. And so you know, the part of the idea here is tell us what we have to do with land use and population modeling in order to make this stuff feasible. So am I correct that we're also, that's that second track you had there on the right side of that one screen, that we are also looking at what we need to do if we want to do certain things?
Yes, Senator Surville, that is absolutely correct. So we're going to be able to show you, based on where things are today from a planning perspective, what the recommendations would be, and then we're going to do the analysis to show what the difference is between what's currently planned and that future scenario that has higher density development, that's more transit supportive, and then that way you'll see what that gap is. But that is definitely part of the scope of the study.
All right, and the last question I had right now, at least, was when we did this for the yellow line, we it seemed to me like a big constraining factor on what options at least the local DOTs were willing to recommend to you all had to do with funding assumptions. And, you know, they were assuming really constrained funding models, that is, that there would not be a lot of money available to build anything. And so what are you all making any funding assumptions, or are you assuming any funding models in order to reach your conclusions? Because I know, for example, what ended up driving a lot of the outcomes in the last study like this I was involved in was they would only look at the Federal Transit Administration New Starts program as basically one of the only viable models to get some real capital on the table to pay for things. I mean, are you guys, what kind of assumptions are you all using there to drive your outcomes, or are you considering funding assumptions and driving your outcomes?
So Senator Surville, this is more of an art of the possible study. And so we are not building those funding constraints into the evaluation, but part of the scope of the study is to outline what the cost of each of those potential transit alternatives is, and the path to help fund those, both from a capital and an operating perspective. So we're not approaching it like many transit plans or corridor studies that come from a resource constraint methodology, but really are looking more at a broader vision and then articulating what it takes to get to that broader vision, not only in terms of land use, but also in terms of funding.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Delegate Tran.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Just had a suggestion in terms of the outreach portion. And I loved seeing the list that you had. And as you are, you know, making sure that we're reaching all the communities involved, particularly around need and community impact, just wanted to suggest trying to get in on the any ethnic media. So really, you know, believe that it's helpful to reach people where they're at. And so sometimes some of our communities of color might not be involved in an HOA or other community associations. So if there's ethnic media or kind of community organizations that have deep roots, that would be really good to connect and partner with. And if there's anything I can do to help make those connections, please let me know.
Thank you very much. We will certainly look to make those connections, and we'll also touch base to make sure we're reaching out to the right folks. I see Senator Barker.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I have a wide variety of perspectives on this whole issue here. First of all, as you know, I'm chair of the Transportation Subcommittee, the Senate Finance Committee, and also on the PRTC board. They're working in terms of a lot of these issues, and previously chaired the Fairfax County Transportation Advisory Commission for many years prior to getting elected to the Senate. I also, on the blue line, both the Van Dorn and Springfield stations are in my district. And in Fairfax County, coming south of the Beltway, I have, and I go over to 495, to 395 in Alexandria. In Fairfax County, I have both sides of 95 going from basically the mixing bowl in Springfield all the way to the pretty much to the Prince William line. So I do have, you know, a wide variety of perspectives. And then in Prince William, I represent most of the Lake Ridge area, both east and then also going west to Manassas. bordering that in the northern part of Prince William County. It seems to me that a couple of things that I want to make sure are going to be incorporated in the study. One is to look at what are the impacts, positive impacts of expanding and being able to increase the use of transit coming south, from the Alexandria and Springfield areas in Fairfax County. Being able to look at things like what would be the impact upon congestion mitigation and essentially getting cars off the road. I think having greater capacity, once we get out of the pandemic here and the loss of ridership we've had on our systems recently as a result of the pandemic there. I think there's a tremendous potential for being able to do some things that would really reduce the congestion and get a lot of cars off the road. So I think it's important to look at that and try to make determinations and estimates as to what percentage of people, how many people we would be able to shift from driving the roads to be able to get to their jobs and to other activities they're undertaking there. And interestingly, that really is pretty much a 7-day-a-week issue. And one of the things I hear from a lot of my constituents in Prince William now is that often the roads are more congested on the weekends, coming from Fredericksburg up to DC, than they are on most weekdays, other than just a limited number of hours during the commuting periods there. So that they don't even, take advantage of things, or often are negatively impacted when there is significant congestion there. But the other thing I think that is directly related to it, and it does have an impact on the traffic situation and the cars on the roads, is what it does to the economy. Prince William is the only sizable jurisdiction in Virginia which has less than where the number of jobs is less than 75% of the number of people there who in that jurisdiction who have jobs. Prince William actually it's about a 50-50 split, so it's not even close to 75% of the jobs. So that what you have is tremendous pressures in terms of commuting for people to be able to commute to get to their jobs. And you also, that's exacerbated by the fact that you have to cross water all the way from Occoquan up past Bull Run and heading into the Loudoun County area, so that there are very limited crossings and limited capacity. And we already noted during the meeting that we're in a situation where the most congested area on the 95 corridor is right at the Prince William County line. Prince William Fairfax line is here going down 95. So there are certainly a lot of issues that are there that I think are very significant, because unlike a lot of other places, including Loudoun and Fairfax County, there are nowhere near as many jobs in Prince William as there are people who work. And so therefore, in many ways, they're forced to move to be able to commute outside the county to get good jobs for some of the types of things they do. It's also critical, and the thing that Senator Morrison raised earlier about FBI is a good example of that. In essence, when they were looking at sites in the metropolitan area for the FBI headquarters, they basically said that it needed to be near a metro station. What that meant was that pretty much every jurisdiction in Northern Virginia could qualify except for Prince William. Because Arlington, Alexandria, Falls Church, Fairfax County, Fairfax City, and now Loudoun, have that capacity, and the only area, the part of Northern Virginia that doesn't is the Prince William area. And so what that's doing is actually Prince William did try to submit an application on that, but did not get very far with it, obviously, since it did not meet the prerequisite that you had to have this land available near a metro station to be able to be in the competition for that. So I think what it can do is to not only help boost the economy locally in Prince William County, but also have the positive effect that if people are not having to commute outside of the county because there are jobs that are closer available than in the future that are closer to their homes, it definitely helps from a transportation perspective. as well. So it helps in both transportation and the economic situation. And one of the other things I think is critical to look at here is the potential for development related to transit capacity. There was a proposal in when at the county level in Prince William a few years ago, for expanding transit-oriented development that did not get as far as I think a lot of us had hoped it would. But that is something that is back on the table now with the new Board of Supervisors that I think clearly has a different perspective as it relates to some of the transit situations and the land use opportunities that can be tied to that. So I think there's likely to be, positive development on that in the not too distant future as we're moving forward with land use options that are available that can actually contribute to transit use and to reduction in cars on the road and those types of things. So I think, from both a traffic standpoint and a congestion mitigation, and from the economic standpoint, both in terms of what it does when you have more jobs available locally for people rather than them having to commute outside their home county, their home region, because there aren't the jobs available with locally, is important to factor into this situation. And I think, from our perspective at looking at this with the Transportation Subcommittee, the Finance Committee, what we want to do is to do things that have both a transportation positive effect, but also an economic positive effect, and that are important to not just the Prince William region, Fairfax County, and Alexandria regions in this situation, but are really critical to how we develop our economy in Virginia as a whole, and what we do as it relates to the traffic, and to some extent even some of the other things related to the environment and to the climate goals that we have right now. So there are a lot of factors that I think that need to be taken into consideration there. And one of those I think is back up on the agenda significantly locally is the transit-oriented development possibilities that are being considered through the Prince William Board of County Supervisors now. So I think it's important to make sure that we do all those other types of things, because they do have broad impacts that can be very positive, and nearly all of them have impacts that can really help with reducing some of our other transportation needs as well.
Thank you, Senator Barker. I think those are all reasons that make the work that we're doing with the study just so critical and so important and very, very timely. And so we definitely take all of that into consideration as we move forward.
Certainly, thank you.
Supervisor Bailey, I think you had your hand up. I don't know if you, and I think it went back down. I just wanted to check in to see if you had a question or wanted to speak.
I don't want to take up a lot of time. I just merely want to bring to your attention in the process of this that we will be, I was referring to Delegate Marston's comments in terms of the FBI and Quantico. There will be a change of command coming forth in the summer. We just want to bring that to your attention as we go forward.
Yes, ma'am. That's one of those items that always makes working with the bases just a little bit challenging, or even more challenging. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Sickles.
Hi, good afternoon. Lots of good discussion here today. I wanted, and I might have missed this because I had to take another call, but how big of an impediment is the water crossing at Occoquan to moving a cost-effective, transit system? Is there a way you can characterize that now? Is there any possibility that you could use the existing structures to either glom onto or fit in this?
I think that's a very, very good point, Delegate Sickles. And anytime you have a water crossing, I mean, it certainly adds a considerable amount of potential cost to any kind of separate fixed guideway type project. We're not at the point in the study yet where we can address that specifically, but obviously that would be something that we would look at as a cost of those potential alternatives as we move forward.
So my question about is the existing crossings, would they be big enough? You don't even know that to put a fixed guideway across?
No, that's something that we'll look at as we evaluate those alternatives.
Well, there needs to be a bridge on 95 anyway, so you could design it for this someday.
Hey, this is Cerville. I think also that the Route 1 bridge is scheduled in the comp plans of both counties to go 6 lanes. And I assume I think it came down during Hurricane Agnes. It's got to be nearing the end of its service life. And as part of the widening of that bridge, I would think that this could also be considered as part of that whenever it does happen.
We will definitely make sure that we look at those and specifically talk to our colleagues at VDOT as well to get their input on that from an engineering perspective. But I definitely appreciate that. We'll definitely look into that as we progress.
It is Cerville. One other question I had is, have you all evaluated whether any aspect of this would constitute a compensation event under the Transurban contract?
We have not to date looked at that, but that would be a consideration as well. Do we have any other comments or questions?
I have one more. Is there on VRE? Is there a maximum number of trains once we get Long Bridge done in the 4th track through from Occoquan to Alexandria, et cetera? Is there what would there be any further restraint on the growth of commuter rail? It seems to me if you had frequent commuter rail and more flexible and on the weekends, that would really undermine the economics of this project.
Director Mitchell, are you still listening?
Yeah, why don't I take that? We do have, which will be part of our background assumptions, the additional 5 VRE trains on the Fredericksburg line and additional VRE trains on the Manassas line as well that are part of our deal with CSX. And that does include, as you know, some later evening trains as well as weekend service as well. That is something that we'll include as part of our baseline conditions when we're looking at these alternatives, because those are funded and are expected to be in place after 2030, after Long Bridge, and the 4th track and other rail investments are fully built out.
Thank you.
Do not see any other hands raised, but we have time for a couple more questions or comments if anybody wants to chime in.
Jessica, this is Cerville again. I just want to. I noticed there's a lot of Prince William folks on, but apparently there's some concern about FOIA and advertising. So I would just hope that in the future that we have some coordination on that so they can feel comfortable participating in a public way if we have future meetings, because we could use their input.
Definitely, Senator Cerville. The meeting was noticed by DRPT with the participants, but I do understand the concern on the part of the local governments, and all of us are trying to adapt kind of on the fly to working in a virtual environment. So we will definitely make sure that we figure out a different path for the next meeting, but I do understand their concern and appreciate their participation today. All right.
Hey Jen, this is Tim Roseboom. Real quick, just as we're wrapping up, I think you had mentioned the website was going to be up soon, and it is up and running on DRPT's webpage. So if people want to go and get background information, you can go on our webpage, and if you type Springfield or Quantico in the search, that'll take you right to it. And I think we'll have an archive of the recording as well.
Thanks, Tim.
And this is Scott Servo again. And when do you guys plan your first sort of public type meeting about all this?
Dahlia or Tom, do you have an idea of when that first public meeting is going to fall timing-wise?
Yeah, this is Tom again. We don't have a definite date. I think we wanted to have this meeting first, and we have a technical advisory committee meeting next week. And I imagine at that meeting next week, maybe we'll lay out a schedule to get a little more specific on that. So, we'll follow your lead. We're ready, I think, with some of the background information. That would be kind of the first thing that we would take out to the public on the needs assessments.
Tom, I'm thinking that probably something that would be scheduled for April.
Yeah, I think in order to have enough time to advertise it and get the word out, I think April would be the earliest. Yeah.
Thanks. So I guess as we wrap up, I will just emphasize again that the study team is available to help you. In fact, Todd Horsley just put a link to the study website in the chat for the folks that are on the Microsoft Teams call, so you can click and get right to the study webpage. But our team is available to you at any point in time for an individual briefing or presentations or any to answer any questions you may have on the study. We really appreciate the questions and the feedback that we've got today. That really does help us make sure we're headed in the right direction with the study, and we look forward to coordinating with you and working with you over the remainder of this year to get this very important feasibility study completed and submitted, and to make that resource available to you as decision makers on how those recommendations could then be implemented. Director Mitchell, did you have any closing comments before we sign off?
No, just thank you everybody for your participation today and your ongoing input as well. As Jen mentioned, we have a lot of ground to cover. We will be working very hard and fast on this too, and so definitely look forward to getting your input. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Jen, or any members of the project team as well if you'd like some additional briefings or additional information from us. So thanks again. All right, Jen, are we just closing out the meeting at this point?
I think we're good. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us today, and we will be back in touch soon.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Is now exiting.